You're tuned to Mountain States Policy Center.
And welcome everyone to Peak Policy here at Mountain States Policy Center. I'm Chris Cargill, President of Mountain States Policy Center, and we thank you very much for being with us on this Thursday to discuss the top issues going on not only in the Idaho legislative session, but we'll get to Washington a little bit later as well. And it's been a busy couple of weeks here, both in Idaho and Washington. I want to show you the numbers here of the amount of bills that have been introduced in the various states. Washington, of course, 1,239. Idaho, we're up to 203. Wyoming at 199. Keep in mind, Wyoming's legislative session is a 20-day short legislative session, so you're not going to see a ton of bills come out of Wyoming. Once we get to the end of the Idaho legislative session, it's likely we'll see somewhere in the range of 400 to 600 bills that are introduced, but still a long way to go here in not only Idaho, but also Washington as well. As far as the legislative headlines that are taking shape in Idaho, of course, the state budget fight, which we'll get to just a couple of minutes from now. The parental choice tax credit is also a big issue that's happening right now in the state of Idaho. School construction funding, we're going to hear more about in the coming days, and the ban on home equity theft, which we'll explain on the program as well. We want to thank everyone who's watching, and of course joining me live is Jason Mercier, our Vice President and Director of Research at Mountain States Policy Center. Jason, it's been a busy couple of weeks. We got folks who are tuning in on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, on YouTube as well, folks who are watching on a delayed basis. Let's give them just kind of an overview of what's happening so far in the Idaho legislative session. Then we'll get to Washington here in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So before session started, there was an agreement amongst the leadership that they thought they would be able to sine die, where the session would end on March 22nd. And last week, we had our legislative briefing there in the Capitol. I actually got a chance to talk with the Senate president to say, are we still on track for March 22nd? And he was optimistic. He hoped so. But as you indicated, the budget debate is a little less further, or it's not quite as far along as we would have hoped. A little bit contentious at the moment. So that March 22nd sine die is looking a little less clear. And this is all coming out of a brand new process that the Joint Finance Committee, Appropriation Committee put into place. Because prior to this new system they put into place, according to one of the co-chairs, Representative Horman, the lawmakers will only look about 19% of the budget. And you don't want to do iceberg budgeting. You want to look at the whole thing. You want to have a full feel for what agencies are asking for, what's necessary to meet the citizens' need. So they came up with this new process where they were going to separate up the budgets, have a little less time in the hearings, hearing from the agencies, and more on the actual details of the requests, and do kind of a two-part process where they would do what's a maintenance budget first. So essentially, what is necessary to continue the current spending, the current statutory obligations, and then they would come back and look at the new spending, what are the new buys, what are the new requests, and see if that fits within the revenue projections for the state. And what's kind of exciting about this is this really lays the foundation for the future to go to performance-based budgeting. Unfortunately, it's been a really rocky road so far, and part of that can, I think, go back to the fact that this is a joint committee. You've got House members, you've got Senate members, but there aren't necessarily updated joint rules, and that has created a little bit of confusion how the process is moving forward.
Yeah, and Jason, we just had on the screen there, and we'll put it back up here in just a second. Basically, if you will, the easiest way to try to explain this issue, because for folks who don't follow the issue each and every day, it can be really complicated. But as you mentioned, essentially two different versions or visions as well of how this should go. The maintenance bill, which is basically the previous year's budget, just what you would call a continuing resolution, essentially, on continuing the budget based on last year's numbers, then adding on the extra details versus an all-in-one. So maintenance plus those extra details. And that's really the fight that's happening right now in the state of Idaho is which version is the better way to go. And here's a clip of what happened on the floor yesterday when one of those first maintenance budgets came up for debate.
Now, I like to think about this a little bit like, a family budget. And every family is a little bit different. And what's required to maintain in one family may not necessarily be what's required in another family. And yet what we're debating today is a process that creates a cookie-cutter approach to budgeting that doesn't take into account the differences that exist amongst the different state agencies, driven in large part by the laws passed within this body.
I kind of feel like we're complaining about one thing, but yet we're going to go ahead and do that in the next bill. When it comes out, we talk about this, but we can't talk about them separate. If they need a new car, explain to me how they need a new car. I'm big enough. I'm a grown adult. I can accept that, and I can vote for that. If they need a new tractor because their tractor broke down, that's fine. Explain it to me, and I'll be happy to vote for that. But I kind of feel like we're not intelligent enough. That's what I hear. My message is that you're not intelligent enough to be able to vote for it if I break it up in a different format.
And that really is the crux of this debate, Jason, is whether it all has to be in one or whether you can look at the new additions, the add-ons, in a separate budget or a separate discussion and then take it from there.
Yeah, I think this comes back to what I alluded to is, there used to be joint rules for the JFAC committee under the old process, right? And then the House has their own rules and the Senate has their own rules. This is how committees are supposed to proceed, definitions. I think part of the challenge with this is when this new process was put into place, and this is the first session they've used this, they didn't have those new joint rules. So there was a lot of confusion at the beginning. Well, whose rules are we using? Are we using the House's? Are we using the Senate? Are we using the old JFAC rules? And I think that when we look at this, in the early part of session, a lot of the lawmakers voted for what was called the maintenance budget. And then last week, we had this strange situation where even the chairs of the committee didn't know this was happening just like a half hour before the hearing, where you had like a mini revolt where a majority of JFAC decided we're going to do a different maintenance budget. So you can't have two different budgets on the floor at the same time. Only one of them can move. So this is what's slowing down the process a little bit. And it's not, I don't think it's a fight over this new way of budgeting where you do a maintenance budget and then you can drill into the add-ons so you can have more time to do that. I think it just comes down to a definition of what is a maintenance budget. So, we're halfway here through session. We're getting close to that March 22nd. It's unlikely that this is going to be able to be, as far as the process, revamped or fixed now. But the bones are there, that the framework is there to really move toward a good performance-based budgeting process. And this is where I think Mountain States Policy Center will offer itself as a resource for how can we continue this process going forward, address some of those confusions about what's maintenance, what's not, and get some joint rules so there's not any type of fights going forward as far as what the process is going to be in these hearings.
If you have questions or comments, add them to the chat, and we will get to them throughout the program today. As I mentioned, we'll get to the the Washington legislative session here in just a few minutes. Jason, I also want to touch on one of the top issues. It's going to be one of the top issues of session as soon as this bill, which has been introduced, comes to the floor, and that is this parental choice tax credit. So this is House Bill 447 in the state of Idaho, which would allow for $5,000 of a tax credit to be used for educational expenses for families across the state. It's got a $50 million cap, and there are all sorts of different education choice ideas being put out there, Jason. But this one is perhaps the cleanest because it is just a tax credit. I mean, it is pretty simple in how it's set up. As you know, Jason, one of the top stories on our website right now is fact-checking claims about this latest education choice proposal. And it's been interesting, to say the least, how much information is out there, how much false information is out there. And I just wanted to go through a few things with you as well. There's a claim out there that this is a voucher scheme. That is false. This is not a voucher. This really has nothing to do with vouchers. This is a tax credit that you would take on your yearly taxes. There's another claim that this defunds neighborhood schools. That is also false. It is a completely separate line item in the budget. It doesn't take any money out of K-12. This program will grow. You know, that may be true, actually. We've seen these type of programs be so successful in other states that they actually do end up growing because there's so much demand. I mean, I think we also take a look at the Idaho Launch Program. It is also intended to grow because, again, there's so much demand for that program. Most public school students won't sign up. That is true. In fact, the results that we've seen from other states, as you know, Jason, shows that only about 5 to 10% of students will actually sign up, if that much. And because there's a cap on this particular bill, that limits the amount of students who can sign up as well. There's no accountability. Actually, there's a lot of accountability in this bill. It is no different than the accountability that you would face on your yearly taxes. If your yearly taxes are false, or you put something in there that was false, you would face that. You would face the possibility of going through a process with the state, an audit with the state, to make sure that you were doing it right. There's also a claim, Jason, that Idaho already has enough education choice. And that was based on a Heritage Foundation report that we have the new numbers on that you see right there. Idaho ranks actually 29th in terms of education choice throughout the country. 3 more fact checks here. This will only help the wealthy. That is false as well. In fact, what we've seen in Arizona and Indiana is most of the folks taking advantage of the program have a median household income somewhere between $60,000 to $80,000, certainly not wealthy. The programs haven't helped in other states. Again, that's false. We have 187 different empirical studies on our website that show that it has helped students, not only who take advantage of the program, but also who don't use the program and then just stay behind in the regular public school setting. And then finally, that Arizona's plan is bankrupting the state. That is actually not true as well. So there's a lot of different data that's out there, Jason, on this particular bill. I'm sure we're going to see other proposals put forward as well before the end of the session. But I think both of us agree that really our concentration should be on helping students succeed no matter what educational setting that they're in.
Yeah, when we talk about, from the Mountain States Policy Center, education choice, it's in all of the above, right? You want innovation in the public schools. You want to have access to charter schools and magnet schools. You want to have the ability for specialized tutoring in meeting the individual needs of your children. And for those of us who are parents, we recognize all of our children learn differently. They have different skill sets. And you want every child to have the best opportunity for success in life, to be able to be a good citizen, to be able to be involved in our economic opportunities. And I think that's where we want to see this conversation focus on what can we do as a state, what can we do as taxpayers, what can we do as parents to provide the most opportunity and options for students to succeed. And that really has to be in all of the above. So when you look at Idaho right now, you do have the open enrollment in the public school system. You've got a fairly robust charter school system, some really good magnet schools. You added the Empowering Parents program last year. Now we have the Launch program for those going into other fields in higher ed. But where the state has not taken much of the opportunity that we have seen in other states is on these specialized accounts for parents, whether they're education savings accounts, whether they're the refundable tax credits. I think that it's important to note nobody is proposing, and none of the proposals currently in the legislature are vouchers. And I think that's the frustration that we've had so far in this legislative debate is we're not getting to the actual policy and the goal and what the intent is. There's a lot of fights around words and games based upon poll testing of what's popular or unpopular. That doesn't serve any students. That doesn't serve any parents. Let's actually have a debate on what the purpose of our tax investments are in education and how do we empower parents to meet the needs of their individual students' learning abilities.
If you have questions or comments, put them in the chat. We want to thank everyone who's joining us on the various platforms, as we mentioned, and of course, those who are going to be watching on a delayed basis. Any comments that you want to put into the chat, we'd love to have them. Love to answer any questions that you have as well. If you're not already on our email list at Mountain States Policy Center, go to mountainstatespolicy.org, get on our list so that you can get all this research and recommendations sent to you as well. All right, Jason, as you know, we had a big victory this week. And when I say we, I mean the citizens of the state and MSPC. A big victory this week when it comes to what's called home equity theft. And we want to bring in Madeline Clark, who is one of our senior policy analysts at Mountain States Policy Center, to talk a little bit about this particular issue. Maddie, good afternoon good morning to you where you are. Good afternoon in Idaho. Thank you very much for being here. Want to ask you to kind of give folks an overview of what's happening with this home equity theft issue. What is the issue and why it's so important? And then I want to take a time to show your clip from the House hearing this week.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. So let's get started with what is home equity theft. When a government has a tax lien on a property, in certain states, 10 states can do this outright and 9 have a loophole. They're allowed to foreclose on the property. A local government is allowed to foreclose on the property, sell it, repay the debt. But instead of returning that excess equity that might exist in the property to the original homeowner after the debts are paid, they keep it for themselves and they fund their budgets. This became entirely unconstitutional in May of 2023 when the Pacific Legal Foundation represented Geraldine Tyler from Minnesota against Hennepin County, who had taken her property and stolen it from her. She was an elderly woman that had a small property and decided to move away, and the taxes and fees, she had forgot about them and they piled up. And so she had $15,000 in fees and taxes that she owed. They sold the property for $40,000 and kept $25,000 to fund their local budget. While Hennepin County was defending themselves in the Supreme Court hearing, they were asked, would this apply just as easily to a $5,000 debt on a $5 million property? And they admitted that it would. So the justices ruled unanimously, which from the Supreme Court is very supportive of how egregious this act was that local governments were participating in. So the best summary is Chief Justice Roberts said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and no more. And so that is what is now ruled completely unconstitutional based on the takings clause under the Fifth Amendment. And so the government can't take more than they're actually owed. So that is home equity theft. And now it's up to the states to fix it. The ruling says it's unconstitutional, but it's still on the books in many states throughout the country. Idaho is one of those states, but House Bill 444 gives us an opportunity to close the loophole. In Idaho, they can't steal the property outright, but they can gift it to another government agency. So if they sold it, they'd have to give the money back. But if they gift it, the property just disappears and it's stolen from the homeowner. So House Bill 444 will close that loophole. I had the opportunity to testify on it this week, and it was awesome to see the local government committee unanimously pass it to the floor for debate with a do pass recommendation.
Maddie, let's watch a little bit of that hearing because I thought it was interesting how some of the members didn't know about this particular issue until we brought it forward. And of course, I want to thank Representative Ehlers as well for bringing it forward, which, as Maddie mentioned, will be House Bill 444 in the Idaho legislature. Here's a clip from that hearing.
Chairman Ehard, if it's all right with you, I did bring Madeline Clark from Mountain States Policy Center, who's done some work. I'd like to yield my time to her.
This practice is completely illegal for private lien holders like a bank. The shocking behavior of governments taking property without compensation has been allowed outright in 10 states, including and also the District of Columbia. And 9 other states, this is where Idaho falls in, have loopholes or different administrations. Ours is a loophole state. It's a more limited scheme. Idaho is one of those states, and luckily it's a small change that's needed, just a wording. because the current wording allows Idaho local governments to gift it. You can foreclose, and if you send it to auction, you'd have to return that equity. But if you gift it to another government entity, the property just disappears and the homeowner has no recourse. So in House Bill 444, it would remove that loophole. It's a simple change. I can't say one way or another, but from my perspective as a policy analyst, it is a good policy in that it protects property owners, but it also protects local governments from the potential of future lawsuits because it is unconstitutional.
And Madi, one of the folks who got up right after you was actually from AARP, who said that they support the bill as well because they have concerns about the impact that home equity theft would have, particularly on folks who are retired.
Yes, definitely. Looking at the data from Pacific Legal Foundation at all the states that abuse this scheme, it is the elderly, it's the poor, it's foster children even have had this happen to them who've already lost their parents and now they lose the property that they were gifted and didn't even know about. That's happening in other states. In Idaho, we don't know the exact nature of it because that loophole is really hard to figure out how people are using it, but it's just best practice to close it. And I really want to thank Representative Ehlers for sponsoring this bill and taking an interest in this issue because it's very important to limit government and not let them abuse property owners that are going through hard times.
If you want to read more of Madi's work on this particular issue, go to mountainstatespolicy.org. It's on the front page there. And as you can see, Madi's a busy mom, so we'll let her get back to her mom duties, and we'll see you very soon, Madi.
Thank you.
There are a lot of other issues that are coming up in this legislative session, particularly in Idaho. We want to take a moment to show you what we call legislation making news, and specifically from Idaho to start, and then we'll bring back Jason Mercier to talk about some of these other bills.
In the Gem States legislative session, House Bill 493 establishes provisions regarding the prohibition of mask mandates. Senate Bill 1274 prohibits institutions of higher education from requiring diversity statements as a condition of employment or admissions. Senate Joint Resolution 104 proposes an amendment to the state constitution to limit the length of any extraordinary or special session of the state legislature. Senate Bill 1289 establishes standards for library material and to establish procedures for the review and removal of those materials. Senate Bill 1286 prohibits homeowners associations from taking any action to require grass lawns. House Bill 498 establishes provisions to protect minors from harmful materials on the internet. House Bill 415 authorizes a school employee who possesses an enhanced license to carry concealed weapons to carry those weapons on school property in certain circumstances. House Bill 406 adds fentanyl to the list of dangerous drugs that can carry mandatory minimum sentences. And House Bill 400 redesignates the terms embryo or fetus and stillborn fetus to preborn child and stillborn child.
So, Jason, those were only 9 of the 200. There's plenty more. You can go to the legislative tracker on our website at mountainstatespolicy.org if you want to read through all of the different pieces of legislation. We've got all of them there at mountainstatespolicy.org. But, Jason, any surprises to you? You've been covering legislative sessions for a long time. Any surprises in this session that perhaps we didn't expect?
Well, I think going back to the new JFAC process and having the committee vote for a maintenance budget and then having a revolt and voting for a different budget, I don't think anybody saw that unfolding and what that means for the rest of the session. As you indicated, there are several budgets already on the floors of the House and the Senate, and only one of them came up yesterday, a very contentious debate. It only passed 38 to 31, and there's several more budgets to come out of the JFAC process. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this unfolds. And hopefully, again, as we indicated, I don't think this process is broken. There's just some minor tweaks that need to be made to it to really get Idaho to where it wants to go, eventually to performance-based budgeting. And I'm just hopeful that whatever comes out of the rest of the session allows that conversation to move forward and they don't fall back to the old way of only looking at 19% of the spending.
All right, we're going to take a short break here, and when we come back, we'll talk about the Washington legislative session as well here on Peak Policy. It's been said that politics is nothing more than a maelstrom of scrambling interests.
The Irish in the 19th century.
Spare me. We will not yield to the gentleman, and the gentleman will observe regular order.
How does she facilitate it? Was she wasn't?
The fighting is the worst when we're debating the politics rather than the policy.
That's why Mountain States Policy Center has never been more important than now.
At Mountain States Policy Center, we're in the idea business, and we put free markets first. Free markets are the most revolutionary force for change the world has ever known. The government does not create prosperity, our citizens do.
Free markets first means putting families, children, small businesses first.
Free markets first means doing everything possible to arrive at solutions that come from you rather than from the government.
Our organization is unlike any other in the country, fighting for free markets in 4 states instead of just 1. Because we're connected, a bad policy in 1 state eventually makes its way to another.
Tens of thousands of our fellow citizens are moving here, trying to escape bad policies from other states. But when they get here, what will they find?
And who will they listen to? Mountain States Policy Center is that voice. Facts and data without the drama. We're here to support freedom and choice. Small business freedom, education choice, and limited transparent government.
We are here as a beacon of truth, and we will never be afraid to fight for what is true.
The fans of socialism are loud. Big government policies seem unending. Saving the country means putting free markets first.
And that's exactly what we'll do at Mountain States Policy Center. We hope you'll join us.
You're tuned to Mountain States Policy Center.
Do political leaders really want to hear from you? Lawmakers at our state capitol should amend the rules to require at least 3 days public notice of bills to be heard. That way, no matter where you live, you'll have the chance to decide whether you want to give your opinion. Lobbyists and activists may like the current setup, but the process shuts out average citizens. We can all be a little more worry-free if we support the rule of 3. Learn more at mountainstatespolicy.org.
You're tuned to Mountain States Policy Center.
All right, welcome back to Peak Policy here at Mountain States Policy Center. I'm Chris Cargill, the president of Mountain States Policy Center. Glad to have Jason Mercier back with us, I should say, to talk a little bit about the legislative session going on now in the state of Washington as well. We spent the first half hour or so here talking about Idaho. Now, Jason, we make our way across the border. We're looking at Washington and specifically want to talk about these voter initiatives that are coming forward. There are 6 different initiatives, as you know, Jason, that we're going to put up on the screen here in Washington that voters could be deciding upon this fall that got a whole bunch of support with people out in the public signing these particular measures.
In Washington state, under the Constitution, the citizens are basically co-equal lawmakers with the legislature. And they have the right of initiative in 2 forms. Kind of the traditional one that we're familiar with in Idaho and other states, where if you get enough signatures, the voters can put a proposal directly on the ballot. That's an initiative to the citizens. But the other option they have in Washington is something called an initiative to the legislature. So if you gather the required number of signatures, this proposal goes directly to the legislature for consideration. And under Washington's Constitution, it says very clearly that these initiatives to the legislature, if citizens gather enough signatures to get one of these certified, these proposals are supposed to take precedence over anything else that the legislature considers. Right? So there were 1,240 bills that you mentioned in Washington. Under the state constitution in Washington, these 6 proposals are supposed to be considered first. Yet as of now, there have been no public hearings on them and no action by the majority party in the legislature. So there's kind of a question of, are they going to comply with their constitutional mandate to look at what the citizens went through the effort of qualifying? But if they don't, the way the process works is there are 3 things the legislature can do. They can adopt it outright, and if they do, that is not subject to the governor's veto. So it just immediately becomes law. They can do nothing, and if they do nothing, then the proposal goes to the ballot for the voters to consider, which means next November, or this November rather, the voters would have these proposals before them. And the final option is they can propose an alternative. And if they propose an alternative, the original goes to the ballot for the citizens, along with the legislative alternative. If I had to guess, we might see a mix of that. We may see a mix of the legislature just not acting on these and them going to the ballot as is. And some of these policies may have an alternative as well. I think a frustrating thing for those of us that respect the rights of citizens to engage in lawmaking and want to see the Constitution followed, you can't get any clearer than shall take precedence over any other action. And they haven't even held a public hearing on it yet.
Yeah, and that's the disappointing part, Jason. And I think the other part is that some of the language that they're using basically to just dismiss these initiatives and say, oh, it was just because, some rich person donated a lot of money and that's why they were able to go out and get the signatures on all of the measures that we had up on the screen. There they are again. These are things that Washingtonians have supported for quite some time. And I think a lot of them are common sense ideas as well that you would say if they actually do make it to the ballot, they have a pretty good chance of being approved.
Yeah, just to give you an indication of how many signatures we're talking about, every one of these proposals secured more than 400,000 signatures. That's almost 80,000 more than was necessary to qualify for certification. So whether you want to attack the sponsor of them, you want to attack those that funded the campaigns, the fact remains 400,000 Washingtonians signed each and every one of these. And as you indicated, these are policies that have been either supported by the public in the past or are currently receiving majority support in the polling. And I think that for those that aren't really familiar with these individual policies that are on the going to be on the ballot, when the legislature passed the thing the voters are responding to, they used emergency clauses. And what an emergency clause means, another right that citizens have in Washington, is the right of referendum. Essentially, the citizens can veto, just like the governor, any bill the legislature passes if they get enough signatures. The legislature circumvented that right by attaching what's called an emergency clause, and that preempts the people's right of referendum. So not only do you have the fact that you had 400,000 signatures, but this is really the public's first chance to respond to the fact that the legislature denied them the right of referendum when these policies were originally adopted.
If you have any questions or comments, put them into the chat today. We will get to them throughout the program. Want to thank Jed and Norris, as well as who I believe is his name is AV Geek Joe, but we'll just call him Joe for the purposes of the program today. So thank you, Joe, for your comments as well. And again, thank you for all those who are participating live and the folks who will participate on a delayed basis as well. Jason, let's stick with Washington for a moment because something happened this morning in the Washington legislative session that is kind of staying on this theme of elections and local elections versus state elections and elections for taxes and so on. Explain to folks what happened.
Yeah, so there's a bill in Washington that would allow local governments to move to even year elections. So rather than having something on the ballot every single year, you would only have your city council races or county council races or school board races in the even years. And the argument that the supporters of this make is that turnout is higher in those years. We want to have more voter participation in our elections. That sounds like a good argument. That makes sense. This is kind of the reason why you see a lot of people trying to get rid of special tax elections, move those tax elections to November, because you want the highest voter turnout. The irony, though, is when this bill was on the Washington state floor this morning in the House, there were amendments that made that point, saying if we're going to do this, if we're going to allow these local elections to only be conducted on even number of years, the same concept should apply to tax elections, to local levy elections. Those should have to move to the November ballot for true even years because obviously we care about voter turnout. Well, apparently not, because those amendments failed. So apparently the message coming out of those that are supporting this bill in Washington state is we care about high voter turnout when it comes to things that don't relate to taxes. When it comes to taxes, it's okay to have those happen in February in a low voter turnout. You can't have both. If we care about this, it should be a consistent policy.
What's interesting, Jason, as you know, is we're having this debate in many states. Idaho's having the debate about whether we should have a fewer number of primaries or basically no primary elections for taxes like this as well. So basically, it would go to just the November election. And then you and I were looking at this bill yesterday from Wyoming that actually made it to where you would have to have 51% voter turnout in order for one of these bond or levy elections to be valid. So there's all these different ideas out there that are happening. I'm interested to see which one gets the most amount of traction. But yeah, kind of hypocrisy in Washington to say, well, we're going to have it for one, but not the other.
Yeah, and you mentioned that Wyoming bill. So Washington and Idaho sessions are well underway. Wyoming's short budget session actually starts next Monday. And because it is a budget session, it's only 20 days. And an interesting thing in Wyoming, it's something that other states might want to take a look at, is in their short budget sessions, even though you mentioned there were more than 200 bills that have been proposed anymore, they are not allowed to consider a non-fiscal bill without a 2/3 vote. So they're really trying to focus the time and the energy in that short session on budget issues. Obviously, with this election one related to taxes, related to spending, and it does just get back to that concept of we want a broader sense of the community when we're making tax policy. So Wyoming hasn't quite gotten to the point where they're moving away to the November ballot. What this bill would say is if you're going to have one of these special elections, to have these low voter turnouts, you need to at least hit that 50% of what you would normally get in the November election for the results to be valid. That's one way to approach this. What we've been advocating for is just move everything to November. There's really no reason why a low turnout special election should be addressing tax policy.
Yeah.
With a full sense of the community involved in this.
Well, and I can think of a reason why, some might say, and that is that, of course, it's a lot easier to try to convince 2,000 people in your local town or city to vote for something than 10,000 people. But to your point, Jason, that doesn't necessarily mean it's good policy. Let's look at some of the other legislation making news in the state of Washington as well.
In the Evergreen States legislative session, Senate Bill 6312 would prohibit the removal of a federal candidate from a ballot due to an allegation of insurrection or rebellion against the candidate unless the candidate has been convicted. House Bill 2030 would allow anyone incarcerated in a state prison to vote or sit on a jury. And Gross Senate Bill 5462 requires that all public school grade levels to teach history of the LGBTQ people. Senate Bill 6196 creates the Evergreen Basic Income Pilot Program. Senate Bill 6156 permits ranked choice voting in local elections. Senate Joint Resolution 8207 amends the Constitution to allow for simple majority votes to authorize school district bonds. And House Bill 2435 bans TikTok in Washington. Senate Bill 2377 regulates laser hair removal. House Bill 2374 establishes free community college tuition. Senate Bill 6205 mandates instruction on the meaning and history of the Pledge of Allegiance in public schools. And House Bill 1893 allows unemployment insurance benefits for those who are striking or locked out.
And Jason, that last one is getting a lot of attention. It is moving that bill to basically provide unemployment benefits for those who voluntarily strike or walk off the job. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to play out.
Now, the interesting on that is this is a policy proposal that California actually adopted last year, but Governor Newsom vetoed it because of the impact it would have on the UI trust fund and the cost on businesses. Because if you're not familiar with how unemployment insurance taxes generally work, you get a rating as an employer based upon how many people are claiming who used to work for you. So the irony of the fact that California's governor said this is going to cost us too much money, it's going to be bad on our taxpayers, yet Washington now is trying to move forward with it. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to see how the session will unfold on that. One bad idea for Washington that's a good idea for Oregon and Idaho tire sellers is there's a bill in Washington right now that would basically restrict the amount of the tires you can buy based upon the how quickly they move, if they have any type of resistance on them. And I think what gives a tire resistance, it's your tread count, right? Because you want to be able to brake, you want to be able to drive in poor weather conditions. The advocates of this bill say, well, that's bad for the environment. If you have too much resistance on your tires, you're driving, you're using more gas than you need to. So there's actually this bill that would reduce your tire options, but you can still go to Idaho and buy them. You can still go to Oregon and buy them. And I guess another frustrating thing about this is this wasn't in one bill that wasn't moving. And just yesterday, a chair of a committee took that concept in executive session without a public hearing, without any public notice, and attached it to a separate bill. So even though you think this concept was dead, it's still alive and moving in a different bill now.
I saw the quote, Jason, that you sent this morning from one of the legislators who said that this could save someone a couple of $100 or something like that every year in fuel costs. And I can't remember who it was that replied to that said, it's hard to save money in fuel if you're dead.
Well, I think the irony of the fact that they recognize this as a problem is the very next section of that bill exempts snow tires. Well, why would you do that?
That's right. Jason Mercier is the Vice President and Director of Research at Mountain States Policy Center. Jason, thanks for being here. We'll see you soon.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
And thank you to everyone who's watched as well here at Mountain States Policy Center on our YouTube page, social media channels as well. We want to remind you of our spring dinner coming up on April 12th at the Coeur d'Alene Resort with Kayleigh McEnany, the former White House press secretary. Hope you get signed up for that at mountainstatespolicy.org. Also, keep in mind our fall dinner, an anniversary gala featuring former Congressman Trey Gowdy and another special guest coming up here very soon. We will announce that coming up on October 4th at the Boise Center. And again, a quick reminder about Legislative Tracker. Go to mountainstatespolicy.org. You'll see the Legislative Tracker right on the front page there. You can click on it and see all the bills that have been introduced, not only in Idaho, but also the highlighted ones in Washington and Wyoming as well. Luckily for folks in Montana, they don't have a legislative session this year. They only go every other year in Montana. So it makes it a little bit easier to follow what's going on in Montana, certainly when you don't have legislative sessions each and every year. But again, Legislative Tracker on our website is the best tool for you to keep track of what's happening at the state capitals in Boise, Olympia, and Cheyenne as well. For Jason Mercier and our staff here at Mountain States Policy Center, I'm Chris Cargill. Thank you very much for being with us, and we'll see you on the next episode of Peak Policy here at Mountain States Policy Center.
Thanks for watching Mountain States Policy Center. To stay up to date on the work of MSPC, visit mountainstatespolicy.org or find us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Mountain States Policy Center. Free markets first.